So you want to shoot videos to grow your brand, grow your business, or just have a ton of fun. The last thing you want is to have a computer that constantly crashes, has choppy and laggy playback, and takes hours to export a single video. We're going to solve that problem in today's video by covering everything you need to know to purchase a computer that will handle all of your video editing needs for years to come. And best of all, you don't need to be a massive tech nerd to make sense of what we talk about. I'll even give you some specific computer recommendations based on your budget. My name is Anthony Gallo. I run a business called ContentCreator.com, where we teach people how to shoot and edit professional looking videos and monetize their skills. With that being said, let's dive into it. All right, let's cut right to it. Mac or PC? That's what you want to know, right? Maybe you don't care, but this question actually has a super easy answer. If you already like PCs, stick with a PC. If you already like Macs, stick with Macs. If you don't know what you like, keep watching this video because we're going to cover what's way more important, the individual components that make up a computer. Once you understand those, you'll be able to look at any computer listed online and determine if it's a good fit for you. And as we cover the important components throughout this video, we'll also touch on how they differ between current Macs and PCs available on the market. Full transparency though, I am a Mac user, and if you stick around to the end, I think you'll see why it does make sense right now to purchase a Mac, especially for those of you who don't have a huge preference between the two systems. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's start covering the components. We'll start with the easy one, storage. There are two factors to consider with storage. How much do we have and how fast is it? As a baseline, I usually recommend at least 500 gigabytes of storage. This is enough to get you started. In long term, it doesn't really matter because anyone who edits videos is eventually going to have to invest in external hard drives because running out of space on your computer is pretty much inevitable. You could upgrade to a terabyte of built-in storage, which is 1,000 gigabytes or even 2 terabytes. But as you'll learn in this video, there are other areas of a computer that are more worth your money. Now, with storage, you also have to consider the speed of your storage. Not all storage is built equally. Some can read and write data significantly faster, meaning your videos will load faster and you'll be able to scrub through the timeline quicker with less lag, even as you add more and more effects. Nowadays though, most modern computers have built-in storage that is more than fast enough to edit videos. This is because all computers nowadays have SSD storage, or solid-state drives. The read and write speed of SSD storage is usually upwards of 1,000 megabits per second, which is extremely fast. The only time you need faster storage is if you are editing extremely data-heavy footage from expensive cameras shooting in ProRes, RAW, or super high resolution, like beyond 4K. If that's the case, you could get something like the brand new MacBook Pros that have SSDs with read and write speeds of almost 6,000 megabits per second. After storage, we have the big boys, the three primary components of your computer that will have the largest impact on how well it can edit videos. These three components are the CPU, the GPU, and the RAM. And if you could just understand these three things, you'll be able to analyze basically any computer listed online. Traditionally, these three components were all separate parts within computers, which made them easy to cover in videos like this. However, in late 2020, Apple complicated the game when they introduced their own line of chips because they essentially took all three of these things and fused them together on one master chip, which is now referred to as a system on a chip, or an SoC, because it's almost like the entire computer system is on one unified component. With that being said, I'm still going to cover each component individually really quick. The CPU, or central processing unit, is essentially the brain of your computer. It handles processing almost every task your computer performs on a day-to-day basis. A CPU consists of individual cores. This is why you'll see 4-core, 8-core, 12-core, and even 38-core used to describe computers listed online. The more cores, the more your computer can handle all at once. Each core also has a clock speed associated with it, where the faster the clock speed, the faster each individual core can complete each task that it's working on, which allows it to move on to the next task even faster. Naturally, the better your CPU is, the better your computer will be at editing and doing basically all of the other things that a computer does. So at the end of the day, we want more cores and faster clock speeds for each core. I usually recommend people look for CPUs with at least 6 to 8 cores. Prior to Apple coming out with their new SoC, the big dogs in the world of CPUs were Intel and AMD. Aside from a few minor differences with each new generation of chip, they're very comparable. Intel and AMD basically split the computing market 50-50. After the CPU, we have RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory and is also commonly referred to as just memory. It's measured in gigabytes, and on the low end, 8 gigabytes is common, whereas some beastly computers have upwards of 128 gigabytes or more. Think of RAM like it's a specific amount of bandwidth that can handle program load or multitasking. Any program that is running will take a chunk of that RAM, a chunk of the bandwidth, and so will all the other individual tasks that your computer is running. The more RAM you have, the more bandwidth you have to handle all these tasks before you max out the RAM and your computer starts to lag. This really comes into play when you're dealing with heavy load tasks, like running multiple programs all at once or editing several layers of footage on a single timeline. Historically speaking, 32 gigabytes of RAM was my base recommendation for editing 4K footage with little to no problems, but like I said earlier, Apple kind of changed the game, which we're gonna get into in just a moment. Then finally, we have the GPU, which stands for Graphics Processing Unit, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It handles the more complex tasks associated with rendering 2D and 3D videos, like editing video content, rendering 3D models, or playing high frame rate video games. As you can imagine, this component is very important to us video editors. Similar to the CPU, your GPU also consists of individual cores, and traditionally, a GPU also has its own RAM, which is called VRAM for video RAM, and this RAM is separate from the primary system RAM that we just talked about a moment ago. I definitely just said the word RAM like 12 times. Okay, I know I threw a lot at you there, but that's pretty much everything you need to know about how computers work, and now we're gonna really start connecting the dots on how these things work together to create the perfect computer for you. So let's assume you're on a budget and trying to spend as little money as possible, but still get a computer that can handle video editing without making you want to throw it against a wall. Your best bet is definitely not to buy new, and instead look at the used market in your local area. In which case, these are the minimum specs that you want to look for. For storage, you want at least 500 gigabytes of SSD. For CPU, you want a minimum of 6 cores, ideally an Apple Silicon chip, but that's probably a little out of this price range. But aside from that, you could probably find an Intel i5, i7, or i9, or an AMD Ryzen 5, 7, or 9. I know that was a lot of options, but they're all really good. For RAM, we really want at least 32 gigabytes, but 16 is acceptable for a super tight budget. And then for the GPU, you either want a dedicated GPU with at least 2 gigabytes of VRAM or an integrated GPU, which we're gonna talk about right now. I know I hinted at it earlier, but Apple really did change the game quite a bit when they announced their M1 chip in late 2020, which was the first iteration of their system on a chip that I talked about earlier. By taking the 3 core components of a computer, the CPU, the GPU, and the RAM, and placing them all together on a single chip, Apple drastically improved the efficiency of the computer simply now because instead of data having to be transferred from the CPU all the way over to the RAM, and then all the way over to the GPU, and then back to the CPU, it can all happen almost instantaneously because they're literally all fused together. Kind of like going out and getting all of your shopping done at just one store compared to driving around town to multiple different stores to get all of the things that you need. That was definitely an oversimplification, but what that means for us users is 3 things. Number 1, performance increases when comparing essentially the same exact specs between Apple Silicon and Intel or AMD chips. For example, an 8-core CPU of an Apple Silicon chip will almost always outperform a similar 8-core CPU Intel chip or AMD chip. The same goes for RAM. 16 gigabytes of unified RAM on an Apple Silicon chip will outperform most 32 gigabyte RAM PCs with Intel or AMD chips. And then number 2, we get efficiency boosts that lead to lower operating temperatures, less need for noisy fans, and significantly better battery life, like double the battery life. And best of all, number 3, lower prices. Because Apple was able to cut out Intel as their middleman for chips, they can cut the prices a lot. So now essentially you can buy laptops new that are much more affordable than computers were 3 years ago that had significantly higher specs. It's pretty freaking awesome. Now, it's been 2 years since Apple released their first system on a chip, which they called the M1 chip. Since then, they've also released the M1 Pro, the M1 Max, and the M1 Ultra, which is literally 2 M1 Maxes fused together. This year in 2023, they also unveiled their M2 series with the M2, the M2 Pro, and the M2 Max. All of these are phenomenal, and even if you got the most basic M1 chip from over 2 years ago, it would serve you extremely well for entry to intermediate video editing. The reason it's important to know all of this is because it will impact the way you analyze computers listed online. Even if you're a PC fan, you want to keep in mind that on paper, a PC might look better than a similarly priced Mac, but because of the awesome integration improvements from Apple, the PC will likely not be anywhere as good as the Mac. Okay, so all of the chips are on the table. See what I did there? You're basically an expert now when it comes to evaluating computer specs. Let's talk about specific recommendations for video editors based on your budget. But real quick, a word from today's sponsor, which is contentcreator.com. Yes, that's me. I'll keep it quick, but at contentcreator.com, we have an online program called 14-Day Filmmaker that has revolutionized the way people learn how to shoot and edit professional content. At the time of recording this video, we've taught over 75,000 students, and the results have been incredible. Have you ever wanted someone to just tell you exactly what you need to know with no fluff and no wasted time? Well, that's exactly what we do in 14-Day Filmmaker. We basically take 8 months of disorganized learning on YouTube and install it in your brain over the course of just 14 days for less than the price of a trip to the grocery store. Not to mention, you get hours of bonus content, cheat sheets, downloadable sound effects, practice footage, and more. In just the core curriculum, you will learn the gear, the settings, the lighting, the composition, the movements, how to tell stories, how to edit like a pro in all of the most popular editing softwares, even the free ones. You'll get social media training, YouTube training, and commercial training. It's all in there, and anyone who signs up through the link in the description beneath this video will get access to 3 programs in total. One version that focuses specifically on smartphones, one that focuses on more professional gear, and a third program that is a crash course on storytelling. Between these 3 resources, you will literally have everything you need to launch your channel, grow your brand or business, or even start a full-time business selling video services to clients. Like I said, the link to join is in the description below, but now let's get back to the video. Okay, so as far as budgets are concerned, if your budget is below $1,000, I highly recommend you keep an eye on the market of used computers in your area. With how much has changed in the past few years, it is incredible the deals you can find on powerful computers that sold for thousands and thousands of dollars just a few years ago. They will be slightly dated, but still very capable of editing professional content. For example, I recently sold my 27-inch iMac Pro that had 64 gigabytes of RAM and a 12-core CPU for $900, and it would absolutely serve any beginner or intermediate editor extremely well. I also sold a 2019 MacBook Pro with 34 gigabytes of RAM for just $600. It doesn't matter if you're looking at used Macs or PCs, just remember these baseline recommendations. 32 gigabytes of RAM, a CPU with at least 6 to 8 cores, and a GPU with at least 1.5 gigabytes of VRAM. That will edit 4K just fine with little to no lag. Keep in mind, those stats pertain to Intel and AMD CPU computers, not the newer Apple Silicon computers. Now, if you have between $1,500 and $2,000 to spend, I'd highly recommend looking at the new line of MacBook Pros with the M2 chips. The 13-inch MacBook Pro is a great option. Just make sure to upgrade from 8 gigabytes of unified RAM to 16 gigabytes, and I'd also recommend increasing the SSD from 256 to 512 gigabytes, simply because the read and write speeds of the 512 SSD is significantly faster than the smaller SSD. This option will run you $1,700, and it will cut through 4K footage like butter and even higher resolutions with little to no problems. If you love PCs, for a similar price, you could get the Lenovo Slim 7, a very popular laptop in the video editing world. This has an 8-core AMD Ryzen CPU, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a nice AMD GPU with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Not to mention, it also has a larger 16-inch display, which is great for editing. If it were me, I would still opt for the Mac as it has better performance with the M2 chip, but hey, if you love PCs, that's your call. Anyways, for those of you in the $2,500 and up budget, I think the best thing you can do is upgrade your screen real estate and jump to the 16-inch option for the MacBook Pros. The baseline 12-core CPU, 19-core GPU, and 16 gigabytes of unified memory is extremely powerful, almost more power than most people editing basic videos would ever need. The only people I think should go beyond this as far as specs are concerned are those working with seriously complex edits and very heavy footage like 6K, 8K, and up. Personally, I'd been due for a computer upgrade and recently bought the baseline 16-inch model and the top-of-the-line 16-inch model, which I then upgraded to have 2 terabytes of storage and 64 gigabytes of unified RAM. I used each one for a week, doing everything from editing content for my social media channels, which you should follow, by the way, editing client commercials, and editing longer form training content for our online courses. 99% of the time, I literally saw no difference in performance. Like, I actually forgot which computer I was using. There was just one memorable instance where I noticed that the spec'd out MacBook performed a little bit better, and that was when I was applying some heavy noise reduction to an H.265 4K clip with multiple layers of color grading paired with motion graphics on top of that. At that point, you basically just need to ask yourself if you even plan on doing that level of editing, and even if you do, how often will it be? Is it worth the additional $1,800? Either way, that covers the core features when it comes to looking at the current state of the computer market as it applies to video editing. To end this video, I want to rapid fire some frequently asked questions I commonly get in my Instagram DMs that pertain to computers. Up first, just to reiterate an earlier point, should I go Mac or should I go PC? Hopefully, now that you have some more context on the situation, I think for most people, I would recommend going with Macs, considering the advancements they've recently made with their new chips. This doesn't mean I hate PCs. I actually think the PC market is going to expand faster in the next few years than it ever has before, simply because they need to start competing with what Apple has been coming out with. But anyways, right now, I think Apple has an edge on most fronts outside of customization options, which PCs will basically always win. In other words, if you like building computers, PCs are more for you. If you want to just buy something that works really well out of the box, go get a Mac. Up next, should I get a laptop or a desktop? This definitely comes down to lifestyle and personal preference. Do you plan on traveling and editing on the go, or working primarily from one office location? For the past 5 years, I've been a desktop guy just because I felt like the power you could get from a desktop just couldn't be matched by most laptops. And with pandemics going around, it's not like I was traveling that much anyways. However, this year, I plan on traveling a lot more, and with the updates and advancements in tech, laptops are extremely capable and you can get them for great prices. And on top of that, if you still want that larger display, you can just get an external monitor and then plug your laptop into that whenever you're working in an office environment. That's essentially what I plan on doing. Up next, people will ask about the color accuracy of my displays. Is that something I should be worried about? This is a good question. Color accuracy is definitely something to keep an eye on when buying a computer. And this is basically, how well the colors being depicted on your screen will represent the colors that the camera actually captured while recording. The good news is all of the computers I recommended today have great color accurate displays, and most computers above the $1,500 price point will have highly developed, bright, accurate displays. The bad news is, no matter how accurate your display is, it also depends on what people are actually watching your content on, which you have no control over, so it's not something to lose hours of sleep over. Then finally, people will ask if I have external hard drive recommendations. And yes, I do. For inexpensive backup drives, I typically go with Seagate 16TB HDD drives, and for faster drives that I plan on using to store footage that I'm actively editing, for that I go with Glyph SSD drives. And of course, if you want links to all the computers I talked about today and those external hard drives, you can find those in the description below. But that does it for this video. I hope you found it valuable. If you did, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button, or if you joined our program 14 Day Filmmaker. Other than that, make sure to check out some of the other videos on our channel, in which case I will see you in the next one.